This is episode 6, the 1918 flu pandemic, the forgotten plague. That's my French. Plague. This is Rio de Janeiro, 1919. Well, this is already a lie if it's the 1918 flu pandemic. Am I right? High five. All right. I'm going to put you down. Nope. You got to let go of that. Okay. Now we're going to get into the video.
This year, Carnival is different. The flu that had killed 15,000 in Rio is gone, but its spirit lingers. Float crews adopt macabre themes taken from the height of the outbreak. There's the Block of the Holy House, playing off a popular euphemism for the hospital. Behind them parades the Block of the Midnight Tea, named after a rumor that doctors killed terminal flu patients with opium overdoses. Streetcars pass, decorated with teapots and cemetery gates. A few months before, the same streetcars had collected the city's dead.
I'm doing this from Extra History, and then I started by request Ibn. Oh wow, I can see the name Bututa. Ibn Battuta. Anyways, Extra History has been pretty entertaining. So if anyone has any more stuff from this, I would love to do it. Because it's a pretty entertaining channel.
The third wave of the pandemic kept killing until 1920, but it was clear that the worst was over. Humans had done little to stop the virus. Instead, it simply ran out of fuel. Those who caught it became immune, and it spread across the globe so fast, infecting so many people, that herd immunity began to protect those who escaped previous waves.
It ran out.
But there were still flare-ups. On November 11th, 1918, the news broke. An armistice. The Great War.
I said it ran out, by the way. What I was meaning was it circled the globe so fast it ran out of people who didn't get sick. And a lot of other people did get sick. They weren't coming down with it. So it was protecting a lot of other people who were like, woo! And then, of course, it ran its course to where it weakened. Probably, what's the word? I want to say morphing. We'll just say morphing. It morphed into a different kind of thing, but it wasn't as sick. We saw the same thing with COVID. COVID had a really bad one, and then it changed, and it wasn't as bad. And my channel debuted. I came down with the I don't remember the strain, but it was I did have a shot, but I came down with it on a Saturday night, and I could have went to work on a Wednesday. So it was really nothing.
War was over. People flooded the streets, ignoring bans on public gatherings. And in each city, a new wave of infections followed the impromptu celebrations. The same would happen again and again on a smaller scale, as loved ones gathered to welcome returning soldiers home. There were still outbreaks, still deaths, but everyone could see it was trailing off. The horror was past. All that remained was to count the cost, a project that continues to this day. In the years after the pandemic, researchers initially estimated the disease had killed 20 million people. Modern estimates have increased that number to 50 million. Though because statistics aren't available in the worst hit regions, like India and Russia, the final number may be twice as many.
Now, if you were a soldier and you were going to war, or let's say you were a soldier, you're on the battlefield, and some came down sick, did they count that as a flu death? Or did that just kind of stick to, well, he was on the battlefield, that's battlefield casualty, Because you could have also lost a lot of numbers that way. Just kind of throwing that out there as if anyone knows.
According to modern estimates, it killed 17 to 20 million in India, perhaps 4 million in Indonesia, possibly a million in Russia, 400,000 in France, and 390,000 in Japan. In the United Kingdom, it sickened a quarter of the population and killed up to 220,000. In the US, it took around 675,000, more than the Civil War, and killed 16,000 in Philadelphia alone. But for a disease that killed so many, it's hard to point out direct consequences. In fact, the flu seems to have worked in tandem with the war, each magnifying the effects of the other. In the 1920s, a wave of political unrest swept countries around the globe. This was because of the war, but also because the flu had revealed deep inequalities, especially in colonial rule. Post-viral fatigue from flu infections probably contributed to the depression and listlessness that took hold after the war. Yet, despite the heavy toll the flu took, and the heroism of medical workers that died fighting it, there's still...
I just want to... The depression that we had was in 1929. Let's see, Woodrow Wilson was Wilson. And then after Wilson was he died of a heart attack. Warren G. Harding. He didn't serve a full term. And then Calvin Coolidge. And FDR got in 32. So he would have been president 29 to 32. Or was it 28? Anyways, it was Hoover. But I apologize. I lost my train of thought. I don't know how unrest in the 20s, 9 years later, could have caused the Great Depression. I think that's a bit of a stretch, because there were things that were happening. Now, in terms of maybe for the U.S., I don't know about the rest of the world. I don't know about what kind of things were happening there. But for the U.S., I think that's a bit of a stretch. 9 years is a long time.
No monument commemorating the event, other than plaques marking mass graves. Textbooks mention it, but usually just in passing. We chose not to remember, which is why some have christened it the Forgotten Plague. There are theories why society chose to forget the flu. Perhaps it came and went so fast that people simply remembered it as part of the war. Or it's possible that focus on the war and inability to see the big picture meant that society never really absorbed what happened. But keep in mind, it also hit a generation that was just more used to epidemics, in a time where mass death may have been less shocking. Conversely, some have argued that the flu was so traumatic, families formed unspoken agreements never to discuss it. The memories that did endure were intensely personal. Lost parents, lost siblings, friends gone too soon, families impoverished when their breadwinners died. In some cases, soldiers came back from the trenches to find their entire family wiped out. Ask your family, and you might find a story of your own. Generations later, the trauma still lingers. Yet apart from Catherine Ann Porter's Pale Horse, Pale Rider, there was no explosion of novels about flu, as there were about the war. It was a more difficult subject, its faceless enemy more challenging to portray than the man-made terror of the trenches.
Yeah, people are going to be... I mean, what would you rather read about? I'm going to be just as guilty. Would you rather read about a flu? When you don't quite know how it starts, you don't quite know how it spreads? Or would you want to read about World War I and all the countries coming together, all the fighting, the trench warfare, the gases that were used, the tank, the plane? I'm not trying to say this in a weird way, but that's more of that's the sexier novel that you want to read. That's the violence. That is everything. Much like America in World War II. That's the war that a lot of Americans look back on. They're like, yeah. I've never really jumped into World War II outside of the Pacific War thing that I'm doing, the Japanese Pacific War. Outside of that, I haven't done anything with World War II yet. I want to. But yeah, I mean, my point was, I apologize. My point was, you're going to want to read about the war and all the things that happened, all the behind the scenes, all the battles, over a flu. You know what I mean?
But Porter wasn't the only notable person to suffer from the flu. In fact, it infected so many famous people that it raises a chilling question. How different would our world be if even one of them had died? Among the ill were President Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Gandhi, Kaiser Wilhelm, and General Pershing. A generation of notable artists caught it as well, including T.S. Eliot and a young ambulance driver named Walt Disney. Franklin Roosevelt contracted it while sailing on USS Leviathan. Then there are the people we did lose. The president-elect of Brazil and Austrian painters Egon Schiele and Gustav Klimt. Lenin's right-hand man succumbed, clearing the way for his replacement, Joseph Stalin.
Oh, wow.
And in New York, the flu...
We did it. We blocked the sound. No one cares what you're saying, man. You or your purple carrot. That sounded weird. Just go ahead and pretend like I didn't just say something like that. Back to the video.
And in New York, the flu killed an obscure German immigrant, allowing his son to cash in his life insurance and expand the family's real estate business. His name was Frederick Trump. You might be familiar with his grandson. But the flu also drove scientific discovery. Doctors developed new surgical techniques and procedures for disease containment. It likely sped up the civilian world's adoption of ambulances. The desperate vaccines produced during the pandemic, cocktails of antibodies from every bacteria doctors suspected, were the predecessor of today's combination vaccines, like diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. Nurses, who bore so much of the burden, won new confidence and respect for their profession. Increasingly, their discipline became more than serving as doctors' assistants, and the flu helped them be seen as professionals in their own right. Many cities and nations, caught off guard by the crisis, established new health departments and organizations to monitor disease. It helped push the idea of national health insurance and government-provided medicine. And it drove research. By the 1930s, researchers were crafting effective flu vaccines. And many who battled flu would go on to do great things. Anna Williams nurtured an entire generation of female researchers. FDR eulogized Welch via radio. And remember Oswald Avery, the guy Welch tasked with finding Pfeiffer's bacillus and who helped develop the pneumonia serum? After the war, he returned to researching bacteria, trying to discern how a bacteria without a hard coating transformed into a bacteria with one. After laboring for 20 years, he finally found the substance that caused the change: DNA. That's right. Avery discovered that the purpose of DNA is to carry genetic instructions. Today, he's considered a pioneer of modern genetics. The flu also drove research into Pfeiffer's bacillus, which many still believed caused flu. After working in a military hospital during the war, one Scottish doctor devoted his life to studying microbes. One day, he accidentally left a culture of it out for the night. When he returned the next morning, he found a strange mold growing on it that killed any bacteria it touched. That man was Alexander Fleming. And the mysterious mold? It was penicillin, the first wonder drug and probably the most consequential discovery of the 20th century.
And penicillin started being mass-produced in Peoria. The building's still standing where they did all that in the basement where they produced it. Used to drive by it all the time. Used to be right near the old Peoria Chiefs baseball stadium. It was very cool. My mom one time said, yeah, that building over there's where they made penicillin. I was like, oh, cool. She goes, yeah, they mass-produced it. I think it was for World War II or just before. And I was like, what now? She's like, yeah, that's where it was mass-produced. That's crazy.
Even today, the 1918 flu remains a subject of study for researchers. In fact, over the last several decades, researchers and epidemiologists have started to make breakthroughs on the 1918 flu. helping us better understand what happened so we can combat the next great pandemic. Researchers still don't
Kind of might have screwed up a little bit in 2020. On to the next one.
know where the flu emerged. There are way more theories than we portrayed, but we can now name the culprit. In 1998, researchers obtained a lung sample from a frozen grave in Alaska and confirmed what many suspected. The 1918 flu was H1N1,
Bird
an
flu?
avian strain, new then, but is less dangerous now that our immune systems have had a century of exposure. They've also begun to unravel the pandemic's mysteries. For instance, we now suspect that it killed young, healthy people precisely because they were young and healthy. Those patients that turned blue, they probably weren't killed by the flu at all, but by their own immune systems. Once infected, victims' immune systems triggered a massive inflammatory response known as a cytokine storm. But instead of neutralizing the flu, this enormous release of disease-killing cytokines filled the lung sacs with fluid and inflamed them so much they couldn't absorb oxygen. But the greatest lesson of the flu pandemic is that flu can't be ignored. We don't shrug off new flu strains anymore. In fact, many health organizations monitor both human and animal strains, predicting the dominant variety each season and creating vaccine ahead of time. If a new strain does arrive, we'll be much more prepared than doctors were in 1918. We have electron microscopes, antivirals, vaccine labs, and tested containment plans. But a vaccine would still take months to produce, meaning we'd start by using the same measures they did a century ago. Voluntary quarantine, banning public gatherings, staggering work hours. In fact, as Rob researched these episodes, the city where he lives, Hong Kong, closed schools to prevent a seasonal flu outbreak and killed birds that tested positive for avian influenza. A century later, the battle against the 1918 flu and its offspring continues. So seriously, get your flu shot. From an actual medical professional and not a animated cat.
This is really good. This is really good. I apologize to whoever it was that recommended it. You deserve some credit. This is really good. So, I do apologize for some of the talking, but, I gotta share. Okay, I'm gonna end this here. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a good day. Have a good night.